The ground this entire morning. Former President Jacob Zuma expected in court on corruption charges. Large numbers have been mobilized to support the former president ahead of his court appearance. Let's go back to Ayanda now for the latest. Ayanda?
Good morning to you, Des. Good morning to our viewers at home. Well, what we can tell you now is that the former President Jacob Zuma has arrived here at the Pietermaritzburg High Court. We also saw the defense counsels for Mr. Zuma, led by Advocate Moses Kakane. Earlier on, the defense counsel representing French arms company Thales, Advocate Anton Katz, he also arrived here, and for the state advocate Billy Down. They are all inside the court room now, and you understand that the proceedings here should now get underway at 10 o'clock this morning. Of course, this is the start of the trial in the former president's criminal matter. Of course, while all eyes are going to be on what is going to happen inside the court, and the big question now is whether or not the former president will appeal Friday's judgment. We have not yet had any word from the defense teams whether or not they are going to lodge an appeal. But of course, earlier on we were speaking to Advocate Makhosazana Mbonani, who was telling us that they had 15 days from Friday's decision in which to lodge that appeal. Whether or not they make that request to the court today, or they request a postponement and then in the next coming days for them to lodge an appeal, that is still possible. Of course, if the appeal, when it happens, is denied, they still have the route of then petitioning the Supreme Court of Appeal. But it certainly looks like this is a matter that is still going to drag on. Already it's taken 15 years since the former president was first charged. So as I said, the focus is going to be inside court. Of course, we can not, there's a lot that is going to be happening outside. This time around, we are expecting large crowds to come out in support of the former president, and I can tell you that inside court, in terms of the gallery, there are some leaders of the ANC here in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. We also have religious leaders. They are already inside. Some members of the Zuma family as well are also here in support of the former president. But speaking about what is going to be happening outside, usually by this time there is large crowds that have gathered. From where I am, I'm just looking across, I see members of the MVA. They are singing and getting themselves ready. Not a lot of people as yet. There is a lot of activity on the road just across from the court. But let me bring in now one of the organizers for the support for the former president, Mr. Shezi. Mr. Shezi, thank you very much for always agreeing to chat with us. We're just looking across with you. Usually in previous appearances, by now there is often quite a large crowd, and not as many people as I said as previous appearances. Are the buses on their way?
Of course, there are not as many people as you would compare with other appearances of President Zuma in this court, but you'd also understand that that may also be attributed to the fact that usually, or in the past days, we normally have night vision, which draws in a large number of people through the night who wake up in the morning, who find themselves in this court vicinity. So today there was no night vision. The people who are coming are only coming now. Some of them will be arriving towards 11, even 12. But we're not really expecting a lot of people today, because we normally reserve that for the last day of his appearance so that he can address the big crowd and deliver his message. But I'm really satisfied looking at outside, looking at members of Umkhonto Wesizwe in their full regalia in support of President Jacob Zuma, who has dedicated his entire life to the struggle for the fight against apartheid and for justice in South Africa. They are here in numbers. They are here to salute their commander-in-chief.
Mr. Shares, of course, last week on Friday we spoke to you. We're rather disappointed by the ruling by the court. You've had now time to possibly engage with other members of the ANC. What are you picking up on the ground? What are people saying about this judgment?
Of course, there is a generally disappointment throughout all the corners of the supporters of President Jacob Zuma. Whilst we are disappointed, we also believe, even though we may not preempt of what is going to happen, but we believe that it is really necessary for President Jacob Zuma's defense to launch an appeal to this judge, to the Friday judgment, because we believe that another court may come to a different conclusion than this court in terms of giving President Jacob Zuma a permanent stay of prosecution.
And now tell us, previous appearances, once the court proceedings are concluded, the president does go across and address supporters. Is that going to happen? Last time it didn't, but of course there were not a lot of people that were here on Friday. Are we likely to hear him today go out and speak to the supporters?
Of course, there is that possibility, but as we are saying that we do not know what is going to transpire inside the court today. You'd understand that generally when President Jacob Zuma appears here, he draws a lot of support throughout the province. People will be bussed in, coming from as far as Stenga, coming to this court. It will take time until the crowd really gets into numbers, so that may be something around 2 in the afternoon. So it will also depend on what is going to transpire inside the court. But by looking at the numbers outside does not necessarily mean that these are the numbers that are representing the support that President Jacob Zuma enjoys. He is still the #1 loved politician in South Africa. Not even a sitting president has a following of President Jacob Zuma.
Mr. Shares, I'm just looking at the leadership of the ANC. I mean, if we look back since 2005, the support that he had, the leaders, particularly here in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, and slowly we've seen these numbers drop. We would see the entire, or at least a large number of the provincial executive committee leaders of the ANC here in this province. Not so much now. Do you, as a supporter, obviously an ANC member as well, do you see that some might now, some have said, will be turning their back on him? Do you also agree that in this province there are those leaders who are now turning their back on him?
Of course, one cannot run away from the fact that in politics generally, while we are fighting for genuine emancipation of black people, some people have taken to themselves to use that as their career. So they will always look for opportunities and look where their bread is buttered, And when difficult moments come, they will turn their back on the leader. More especially in the position of President Jacob Zuma, who is no longer the sitting president of the country, who has nothing really to offer them in terms of their careers. But I'm not really going to dwell much on that because I know no one who has done that. But I can tell you, there are a lot of people who support President Jacob Zuma, genuinely who have stood with him through thick and thin, who could not be in this court today. People like Kalni House who have expressed his disappointment that due to personal reasons could not make it to the court. I know former ministers who have expressed their disappointment that they could not be in this court today.
All right. Gosanjase, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much. We'll catch up with you a little later as well to get that final confirmation whether or not indeed today the former president, once the court proceedings have been concluded, whether as in other previous appearances, whether he will then go across to address his supporters. And that, Desiree, gives us an opportunity to hear his thoughts and his feelings. He often shares with the crowds, the court processes, and in this case, if he does go ahead and speak to his supporters, he probably recap on Friday's sitting, on the judgment, and also his feelings on the case. And indeed, of course, what we are waiting to find out is whether or not he is going to lodge that leave to appeal Friday's judgment. 10 o'clock, the court is set to get underway. We're going to leave it here for now, Desiree, and it's back to you.
And Mhlongo, hope to reconnect with you then.